Hello, I'm Richard West, one of the editors of Source, and this is a launch for issue 107 of the magazine. As I say at every one of these launches, how come we've done so many copies, how many editions we've done. This issue is the Signs issue, and we'll be talking to two contributors from this issue. But I should mention a few things before we start. I should tell you a little bit about the magazine, but first I should thank the various backers of the magazine and the people who've helped sponsor this event. The Gallery of Photography Ireland, who are co-hosting the event with us, and our funders, the Belfast City Council, the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, and the Arts Council Ireland. The Wiener Holocaust Library have been very helpful in helping us with some of the work that's published in this issue that we'll be talking about later, so I should mention them as well for their contribution to this issue. This conversation is being recorded now, and this will allow us to put up on our YouTube channel a version of this conversation in the coming days. So if you have to leave early, or if you want to watch it again, then you'll be able to. But I should tell you a little bit about the magazine. The theme is signs, and this runs through the magazine. We have 3 portfolios of work: David Bellingham, Marion Marr, and the pictures from the Wiener Library that I mentioned. Also in the magazine is an essay by Judith Williamson about the partygate photographs, which we'll be talking about more in a minute, and an essay by Alan Huck about the concrete poetry and Walker Evans. And that's a nice segue, because Alan Huck was one of the Writers' Prize winners from last year, and this is the first extended commission after he won that prize, and shows our ongoing commitment to the Writers' Prize, which is running again this year with the deadline of the 1st of August, if we have anybody who's interested in contributing this year. And a number of the writers in this issue are people who've sent work to us through the Writers' Prize in previous years. If you want to see more about the Writers' Prize, then you can have a look at the shortlisted entries from last year and the previous year, which are being published on our website at the moment. And in fact, on our website, there is a whole host of material being published every week, of which I could mention a few things. There's a new round of Annabella Pollan's wonderful flea market photo books column, which is now in its 2nd edition, and she's just written a piece about the bizarre Jacques Penry book about seeing character in the face, which was a forerunner of the photo fit system that the police used. And those are terrific. Also a picture of my cat features if you look through the archive of those articles. The Writers' Prize shortlist, as I said, is being published as part of the season. We have the portfolio days coming up, and so if you want to submit your work to Source as a photographer, then have a look at the submission section of our website to see the next opportunity to do that. The graduate photography deadline for the BA is the 12th of May this year. So if you're graduating this year and want to include your work in graduate photography online, then you've got a couple of weeks to get that together before that deadline is passed. And last, but also beautifully timed, we have a new archive season. This is some kind of anniversary, the 30th anniversary of the first publication of Source this year. And so we have been doing a project over the last 6 months or so in which we have asked a number of photographers, curators, and writers to look through the entire back catalogue of Source. We sent them a giant box of magazines, and they had to read through everything and pick out their 10 or 12 favorite pieces, either portfolios, articles, reviews, that they would recommend to a new reader. We have been publishing those. So Sarah Allen, who was a curator at the Tate at the time she was doing this project, is now at South London Gallery, did the first of these surveys of back issue material. And Stephen Bull, the writer on photography, who has been a frequent contributor to Source, has done another one. And this ties in very nicely with my first interviewee, because both of these writers selected an article from a column that ran in the magazine for many years about advertising by Judith Williamson. And Judith Williamson is the first person I'm going to be talking to tonight about her essay on partygate. So if you want to see any of that material, and it's going up every week, then have a look at our website and you'll see plenty of things to enjoy. If you're interested in getting the magazine, I recommend a subscription. You won't be disappointed. There is, as well as the stuff about around the theme, signs, there's a fascinating collection of reviews, books targeted for photography projects for children. Very interesting review of 2 books by Nora Labo. The mammoth Gilles Perez, 3 books in a box about Northern Ireland is reviewed. The largest book that we have ever reviewed, and many other things beside. But without further ado, I think I should go over to Judith. So Judith, you could unmute yourself there.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
Judith, we've had a relationship of editor and contributor for many years, because as I said, you were writing this column for many years, and it was delightful to ask you to write this piece for the magazine. And so many people over the years have commented on the lucid quality of your writing about photographs, often making a photograph that seems very straightforward, transparent, and making the meaning of a photograph, especially advertising images, seem obvious, you might almost say. But I know it's what seems like an effortless process is quite an effortful process, from having spent many years talking to you about pictures. I thought maybe we'd start by saying a little bit about how you approach writing about photographs. What do you do when either in the past when we sent you a magazine, or when you selected a picture? And this, I think, is probably the same process you undertook for writing about these partygate pictures. What do you do when you start looking at pictures to write about?
Well, this may sound a bit basic, but I really look and look and look. I look incredibly hard, and I suppose I try to look not through any particular lens or filter of my own. And I mean, on all my work, I bring to bear certain kinds of analytical understandings, understandings about semiotics, about how images work, political understandings, social understandings. But I try not to apply anything to the image. All those kinds of analytical frameworks are useful when you want to talk about the image having looked at what's in it. But I really try very hard to look at exactly what's there and to spell it out. And it often seems very basic. It's almost childlike. I remember analysing an advertisement towards the end of my decade at Source, writing those columns. And there was a car parked in the street, but hang on, what's the street? It's a cobbled street. Look closely. Oh, the houses are quite narrow. Look more closely. What are the other shops in the street? What are the kind of windows like? And that's all just descriptive. It's just actually looking at what's there. But if you don't kind of spell it out, you don't sort of build the picture, and everything in the image is saying something. And there were basically, images where every single thing has been thought about. Advertising is so interesting because somebody has thought, oh, we'll make it look Parisian, we'll have a cobbled street, we'll have these little upmarket shops and things and bijou, whatever's, that's all been done on purpose. Other kinds of photographs, the things in it may not have been chosen, or they may be random on some level, but they still are equally important in terms of what its meaning is to the person looking at it, or potential meanings. Obviously different people can see different things. So as basic as it sounds, I really look hard at what is actually in the picture, and I try to spell it out to myself in an almost sort of childlike way. What is there, what are we seeing, what are the people doing? And I think once you start writing just the kind of descriptive level of what's happening, you can start to see, it's almost impossible at a certain point not to be thinking about what those things mean. If there are people in the picture, what do they look like, how they're dressed, what are their facial expressions, and so on. So I start always from the material, from what's there, and I try to look at it without too much preconception, I hope.
Yes. So we started talking a few months ago about the partygate story and the pictures that were related with it, and it is unusual in that it is a story that's hinged on a very small number of pictures, and they are doing an awful lot of work, you might say. I mean, we can unpack this a little bit, but there's the way that these the way that we have actually a very small number of pictures, but a lot of the story has been told through these pictures is particularly interesting. But they're not all advertising pictures like the ones you were talking about in your column. But maybe we'll have a look at the first one we talked about, which the advertising pictures. So these are advertising pictures in a traditional sense of the word. Is that clear? Those are the first two of those advertising images. So what are we looking at here?
Well, when I looked at this group of images, the most recent sort of ad campaign, the first thing, in fact, what I chose to start the whole article about was simply the advertising device, which I think is actually a good one, the little tiny sort of coronavirus, the expanded virus particles, if you like. And if you look closely, the bigger ones have got the little spiky sort of coronavirus shape. So it's a very good way of actually showing how aerosols can spread the virus. It's a bit like they used to have these flu ads where there was a kind of green substance that somebody, every time they put their hand on something, it went on it. Anyway, so then looking at the people and the situations, what dawned on me, again, through attention to detail, was how relentlessly ordinary and everyday they've tried to make these situations and the people. The one that I thought was particularly interesting is the office one. If you look at that sort of piece of office furniture, if you've ever been in a kind of middle of the road office, it's that kind of that fake wood sort of laminate. Those kind of modern desks with the holes for you to put the wires for your computer in the back and everything. There's something about the flavour of it. Just even that little simple bit of office furniture. It's not a flash piece of furniture. It's not a nice wooden desk, and it's not a kind of modern, kind of modernistic, trendy kind of stylish desk. It looks like an incredibly kind of ordinary office, and they've chosen a selection of people who represent sort of a wide range of social groups. And all the ads, the one with the boys watching TV, which is up on the screen right now, or young men, again, incredibly ordinary people in a living room with a glimpse of a kind of ordinary looking sofa. They're obviously watching sport or something enthusiastically. Somebody has actually worked quite hard through everything from the clothing, the people themselves, the bits of furniture, to try to sort of say, these are regular people, these are like ordinary people. And that's the thing that really came through to me most strongly. And there's a kind of game that you can play, which I used to do with my students, a kind of called the substitution game, where you imagine switching something in an image for something else. And that's how you understand the meaning of the thing which is there. So if you picture, for example, that in any of these situations, the people were looking incredibly smart, really well dressed. Let's say in the office, there was a sort of really beautiful kind of, posh sort of oak desk. And the people were wearing sort of like, linen suits and stuff like that, and ties. And there were, you could make people look really kind of posh, basically, by changing a few of the elements. There's another one which I think is in the magazine, which you haven't got on the screen, which is called Nan, and it's presumably a woman visiting her Nan, her mother. And again, it's very sort of ordinary. The women are wearing sort of cardigans that don't look particularly, they don't look shabby, they don't look smart. It's all been very carefully arranged to look ordinary. So I think these are really interesting because it's an ad campaign that, although you wouldn't think about it at first glance, when you actually look at all of them, it's clearly not aimed at any very sort of upmarket people. It's sort of, it's aimed at kind of ordinary workers. It appears to be aimed somewhat at sort of, Black people, because they seem to be in quite a lot of them. And that then gave me the feeling that actually, no matter how well-meaning the kind of, the thing about the virus is, they are talking down to people. And then that element, which I sort of thought through just from looking at these pictures, turned out to be an incredibly important thread in looking at the other images and talking about partygate, because it's the issue of talking down and thinking that you're above other people, which is obviously the core of the, of what's ethically wrong about the whole partygate thing. And nobody in these pictures.
Have a look at the next image, which is I suppose the most central partygate picture that we have so far, pending further revelations, of the number 10 garden. This is a very different type of picture.
Well, it's very different. I mean, the first thing one can say is that it's not been constructed in the way that the advertising images were constructed. I mean, the reason I feel so confident about their intention of speaking to about ordinary people or to ordinary people is because everything in an advertising image has been thought about carefully and organized and chosen and put in place. This, on the other hand, is a snapshot that must have been taken from an upstairs window, kind of looking down onto this terrace and the lawn. It may have been composed quite carefully because whoever took it on their mobile phone or whatever has managed to get in the group in the front, just at the front right, the crucial fact of Boris Johnson and she wasn't his wife then, but his then fiancée, and they've managed to also get the group at the back and the couple of people on the grass. So that's not to say this image hasn't been composed by whoever took it in a way that was designed to get as much of the kind of people in as possible, but it's completely different. I mean, the interesting thing to me about this picture is, although it does clearly show that there was some socializing in the number 10 garden, and you can, when you look closely, see the wine glasses, the cheese board, the table in the background has also got glasses on it, and it's obviously a sort of wine and cheese do of some kind, and the claim that it was a working event is sort of belied by the fact that there's no sign of work at all. Nobody's got a laptop open or pile of papers. But what I think is most interesting of all is that this is not actually such a wild party. It obviously contravenes it did contravene the lockdown rules at the time. It was towards the end of the first lockdown, at the point when only 2 people were allowed to meet outdoors and they had to be 2 meters apart. So this obviously violates that. But since this picture came out and the evidence about this party came out, far worse parties have been heard of. The one where people were invited to bring their own booze. There were parties where people spilled out into the garden in the early hours of the morning and broke what must have been Dylan's swing set, and the sort of people playing on a child's slide and the swing and kind of breaking it, which is just a kind of unpleasant image of how careless and sort of gross in a way these events were by the time everybody was tanked up at 2 in the morning. So some of the other later parties were obviously worse, you know, if one can have a kind of grade, a sort of gradation of party badness. But this is the only picture that seems to have surfaced. And so this picture has stood for all the other subsequent parties. And interestingly, even now, extraordinarily, even though we know of much, much worse ones, this picture of this kind of outdoor party is constantly being reproduced. It's still in the papers. I mean, just within the last few days, I've seen it in a newspaper to sort of illustrate partygate. So heaven knows what will happen when the kind of sort of massive amount of other images that the police are presumably sitting on emerges. But this one has stood for a lot more. And I found that interesting in a way, just from a kind of point of view of understanding how images work in society, that an image doesn't just stand for what it portrays, it can stand for a lot else besides. So this, like a snowball, this image has accumulated the meaning not only of the lockdown breaking party which it portrays, which it clearly does, but it's kind of snowballed to represent all the other parties, including the ones, you know, the very heinous ones on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral. You know, so it's become a kind of general signifier of Downing Street parties. And the reason I find that slightly ironic is because it really doesn't look like much of a party. It clearly violates the rules, but it doesn't look like it's a huge amount of fun.
It's interesting. It's interesting the way that the missing pictures have become more and more prominent, if I can put it that way. So there's now a parliamentary inquiry, and one of the things that is said about this pending inquiry is that they will be able to get the pictures that we know exist in evidence, and presumably they'll then go into circulation. And I just saw the copy of the most recent issue of Private Eye, and the headline on the cover is the latest partygate pictures. Obviously they're not the partygate pictures, but it describes that everybody is waiting for the pictures that will fill in the rest of the story. But until those pictures arrive, one other image has stood in that you counterpointed with with this image. Maybe we have a look at that.
Yes, this is the perfect example of what I was talking about, how something can accumulate meanings far beyond what it actually portrays. And not only that, it can actually kind of portray the opposite of what it portrays, or you know, it can signify the opposite of what it's actually showing. This photo of the Queen and variants of it, it was cropped in various different ways, but they're always with the Queen almost sort of overshadowed by the sort of heavy woodwork, sort of all on her own in these choir stalls. It really, you know, a poignant figure by any analysis. This was shown at the time it was taken, around the time of Prince Philip's funeral, but then it became absolutely ubiquitous again at the time of Partygate. And in particular, it was particularly resonant when it turned out that there were several of the parties took place on the eve of this funeral at which the Queen is pictured here. But even before that, as the parties started to emerge, quite a few different papers, including the Daily Telegraph, not known for being anti-Tory, but I mean, you know, anti-Boris Johnson's government, but it had this on the front page as far as I can remember. This picture was everywhere to show, you know, this is what a kind of decent person does, who's fulfilling the lockdown rules. And it reached a point where this picture, and I would say still now, but given the scarcity of pictures of the actual wild parties, this image of the Queen, as I sort of argue in more detail in the article itself, has actually come to conjure up the image of the kind of wild and indecent parties that were held on the eve of this funeral. It's come to stand for its opposite. It's almost as if what it means is the complete contrary to itself. Everything that is shown here is what was supposedly violated. So I find that fascinating, just in terms of the way that images can mean things which are so not only different, but actually opposite from what they literally portray. In terms of semiotics, you would say that ultimately this image can signify, as a signifier, something very different from the actual referent of what it shows, which is the Queen.
So we should say that this image is by Jonathan Brady, who's a PA photographer. And I think this is, he was obviously there to photograph the event in an official capacity. And I think this has became the image that's stood in for lots of other, I don't know if there were many other photographers in the, is that Westminster Abbey, I think, at the event. But
no, and I think it was in the private chapel at Windsor. Okay. It's in St George's Chapel, Windsor. I mean, I know about these royal things, but you're quite right. It was obviously taken by a very skilled press photographer and structured in such a way as to convey the meanings that it does, which is the Queen's isolation, the huge array of empty stalls. If you'd taken it from a different angle, just her on her own, you'd see that she's wearing, well, actually it looks like two masks, not just one mask, but certainly the way it's taken emphasizes her isolation and how far away she is from anybody else. I mean, there were actually obviously other people, but they're not in that bit of the stalls.
What's the connection you would make between the advertising pictures that we looked at of the COVID campaign and this picture? At the beginning, you described those pictures as being sort of slightly patronizing, talking down to the subjects that they're aimed at. It's strange that the Queen should stand in for these events, who stands for hierarchy in this country.
Well, that raises a whole lot of other issues. I mean, I've actually, in the long past, I wrote an essay about the royal family, pointing out that actually in many ways they've often functioned to stand for ordinary people, which may be obviously ironic. They're among the wealthiest people, but I'm just saying that in terms of representation, that idea that they're kind of more like us than sort of politicians are, is quite a potent part of their appeal. I'm not for a minute saying it's necessarily exactly the case, but it is very resonant. I think the fact that the Queen she has that slightly hunched look. There are some things the photographer couldn't have generated just by clever angles and so on. One of them is the fact that she is a very elderly woman, and she's slightly hunched. She's sort of leaning forward slightly in that way, just looking over the top of those two masks. That is, no matter who that was, that would be quite poignant. And just to talk in a quite straightforward way, the thousands and thousands of people who did lose someone who was, their partner, their mother, their father, their child, during all that time when the government was incredibly careless, not only about its own party regime, but about its handling of COVID. I mean, this is a much bigger issue, but it's a huge one. I mean, the nation should be in mourning for what has happened. Even now, literally sort of in the last sort of 24 hours, it's taken a sort of high court to rule that the government was completely negligent in releasing people out of hospitals into care homes. They're lying again through their teeth, claiming, oh, well, we didn't know at that time about asymptomatic transmission. It's taken a law court to point out that actually it was indeed known from January, and pointed out by people like Patrick Vallance, the government's own spokesperson for health issues, in the middle of March, that this was known. I mean, I'm sorry to go into technical detail, but the reason all this stuff matters is not only because of photography and semiotics, it's because these are real issues and they're life and death issues. So for anybody that lost someone, that went to funerals with only a tiny handful of people and couldn't sit next to each other and couldn't go back and commiserate together, to see the Queen looking so poignant on her own, it does give them a feeling of identification, and quite understandably, that's a kind of form of social kind of identification from the top to the bottom. And the irony is that the people who really think they're above all the rules are obviously the Boris Johnson's kind of coterie, who honestly don't appear to think anything applies to them. So I mean, that's obviously why it all matters in the end.
What do you think? Do you have any hopes or any thoughts about the pictures that we may yet see?
Well, it's going to be fascinating. It's a Pandora's box that's going to be opened. I think one of the funny things about this, which we haven't talked about, but is somewhat apparent in the picture, that the one key picture you haven't shown, which is the party at Conservative headquarters. It didn't involve Boris Johnson, but the one, the one with all the kind of, it's in the magazine, the sort of selfie of everybody slightly drunkenly saying cheers and so on. I think there's going to be this fascinating quality of pictures that were clearly taken by people just thinking, oh, we're having fun. Oh, come on, look this way, snap. You know, a little bit of a selfie with the tinsel in the background or whatever. There's a kind of, that I think that they will show a kind of naivete about the fact that they're taking these pictures. I mean, they're breaking the law and they're photographing themselves doing it, right? That's like all those kind of really stupid people that film themselves, you know, beating somebody up or stealing a car or something. So they're breaking the law, they're filming themselves doing it, they're taking snapshots of each other looking merry. And I think that the kind of discrepancy between the way in which the pictures were taken and the fact that they're now functioning as evidence conceivably able to bring down a government, I think that tension is so great that it will be somewhat hilarious in a way, a bit in the vein of the picture, the kind of Christmas party at the Conservative Party headquarters, where whoever took the picture was actually so unthinking that they managed to get in the foreground really big the kind of heated buffet, so thereby making it impossible to claim that they were just people just brought in some sandwiches after work, or, you know, just impromptu end of the day, end of term party sort of thing, because it was so clearly you know, those kind of metal hot plates with food that must have been pre-cooked and pre-ordered. So I mean, whoever took it was so naive that they had absolutely not the faintest idea that it was going to incriminate them to have all that stuff in it. And I think that the pictures that will emerge will be really quite a hoot for that reason. You know, oh, here we are having a load of fun, and possibly, you know, it may cost Boris Johnson the leadership, although that's a different subject, because what they could find to be any better, I have no idea.
Great, thanks very much, Judith. We look forward. We have to get you back for the for Pictures of Partygate 2 when the trove of new revelations appears. So if I could ask you to mute yourself there, and maybe we could have a chance to chat at the end. And sure. I will introduce Jonathan. Jonathan, could you unmute yourself?
I have done, yep.
Great. So Jonathan Long, you've also been a contributor to the magazine for many years, often asked to write about stuff to do with German photography, which is your specialism. Last year, I asked you to review 3 rather harrowing books about the Holocaust during your summer holiday, which is one of the downsides of putting yourself forward for this. But that was something that made us think about you for writing about this collection of photographs that we came across. My colleague John found that's in the portfolio section of the magazine from the Wiener Library. Could you say a little bit about the setting and the period and the photographs before we have a look at some of the pictures?
Yeah, absolutely. So the photographs come from an album of images that were taken and compiled in 1935 by a German Jewish businessman, who owned 2 travel accessory shops, one in Berlin and one in Amsterdam. And in August 1935, he drove with his fiancée from Berlin to Amsterdam as part of his sort of routine running of the family business. And en route, he and his fiancée stopped the car at a number of locations. And there is an article, very good article actually, by Christoph Kreutzmüller and Theresia Zier in the Leo Beck yearbook of 2019. It is possible on the basis of the photographs that were taken to trace their precise itinerary and to actually work out which roads in 1935 they used to cross from Germany, from Berlin through Germany to the Dutch border. And while they were on this journey, they took a number of photographs of signs that had been put up in a whole range of locations on this particular route that basically said that the local community didn't want anything to do with Jews. The photographs are actually quite shocking, and I suspect that this kind of manifestation of German anti-Semitism in the mid-1930s is not especially widely known. You know, it is common knowledge that shops, for example, would routinely place signs in the window refusing to serve Jews. There's been a lot of work, of course, on anti-Semitic violence. There's been a lot of work on the anti-Semitic legislation that was passed by the Nazis in late 1935 and subsequently. And of course, a vast amount of scholarship on the Holocaust, including the visual representations to which it gave rise. But I think that this particular manifestation of anti-Semitism is relatively little known. And for that reason, the first encounter with it is deeply shocking.
Can you say a little bit about the politics in Germany at the time? How far are we from the Second World War, and how's the Nazi Party progressing into power?
So the Nazi Party came to power in January 1933, and of course the first thing that Hitler did, in effect, was to persuade the Reichstag to pass an enabling act, which gave him dictatorial powers and also merged the role of Chancellor and President. And the reason this was important is because under the constitution of the Weimar Republic, which had been the democratic social organization that had succeeded the Hohenzollern monarchy immediately after the First World War, in the constitution of the Weimar Republic, the president could, under specific circumstances, rule by dictatorial decree. So by merging the role of Chancellor and President, Hitler gave himself dictatorial powers. One of the crucial dates, I suppose, in the development of Nazi anti-Semitism was November 1935, which is when the Rosenberg laws were passed. And you know, these basically set the legal framework for a whole raft of anti-Semitic actions and policies that had been present in German society up to that point, but had not necessarily been enshrined in law. So one example of that, for example, would be the prohibition on any kind of sexual congress between Jewish and non-Jewish Germans. So there was a taboo on this before November 1935, but it became enshrined in law at that point. And that is relevant actually for one of these photographs that we're going to look at a little bit later.
Yeah, should we have a look at the first picture? So this is, could you describe what we're seeing in this image?
Yeah, so this shows, so the album was compiled by Fritz Fürstenberg. That was the name of the photographer and the businessman. And this shows his car, which is a Packard sedan, parked on the left-hand side of the frame. We see his then fiancée, Käthe Smoszewski, holding a large black dog, but the frame is obviously dominated by this large sign standing in front of 3 apple trees that reads, "Juden sind hier nicht erwünscht." I've translated it in the article as Jews aren't welcome here, but it's actually slightly stronger than that. It means, you know, we don't want Jews here. And the one thing you'll notice about the photograph is that Käthe Smoszewski's face has been overpainted. And to me, this captures one of the strange paradoxes of the whole enterprise of putting up these signs, in the sense that Jews were clearly supposed to see them and read them, but were also supposed to efface themselves. And indeed, the intention of these signs is to eradicate the Jewish presence from the various settlements around which they were dotted. So what we have here is the paradox of being forced to look and yet not being allowed to be seen to be looking, if you see what I mean. And that I think is one of the things that emerges in this painting over of the face. You know, it is a kind of a Freudian disavowal, where the act of seeing the sign is both admitted and denied at the same time. And it's one of a number of one of two photographs in the album that sort of thematizes or foregrounds the act of looking in, to my mind, extremely interesting ways. I mean, the obvious reason for effacing Käthe Smoszewski's face at the time was to prevent her from being identified, because it was not a risk-free undertaking to drive between Berlin and Holland and to photograph all of these signs en route. The Nazis were acutely aware of their own self-image abroad, so it would have been doubly dangerous to have been taking these photographs with a view to taking them into Holland and thereafter distributing them. But simply taking photographs of this kind could have been seen in contravention of the so-called treachery law, which had been passed by the Nazis in 1934 and made it illegal effectively to do anything that undermined the reputation of the German state and its Nazi government. So it was not risk-free to undertake this photographic project, if you like. So clearly effacing Käthe Smoszewski's face was needed in order to protect her from potential future persecution. But I think looking at this through a slightly different lens, then this whole question of who has the right to look and what are the consequences of looking, what are the consequences of being seen to be looking, starts to sort of unfold as we think a little bit further into this image.
Maybe if we have a look at the next, a few more of the pictures from the sequence, and you pick out in the article that there's often repetition in the slogans.
Yeah, so they work with a very limited number of quite sort of hackneyed or stereotypical anti-Semitic phrases. And I think the reason this is important is that what might at first sight look like sort of spontaneous manifestations of anti-Semitic sentiment are in fact the product of many years of propagandistic repetition of a small number of slogans by the Nazi Party and their acolytes. So what appears as spontaneous is in fact highly sort of constructed and sort of instrumental, if you like. I think, you know, among the other interesting things about the signs that we see in this album is the fact that some of them are quite professional in their calligraphy. So if we look at the one to the left there, you know, there is quite sort of sophisticated and professional looking black letter calligraphy going on. We see something somewhat more basic to the right there, but still reasonably orderly. Some of the other signs are almost graffiti-like. The orthography is poor, the quality of the lettering is extremely poor. So what you realize is that these are vernacular artifacts being produced at a local level with no particular overarching strategy guiding it. And yet the insidious nature of propaganda means that the same slogans keep recurring. And here we can see some more. I mean, die Juden sind unser Unglück. Ah, right, okay, so what are the slogans? So what we have here on the left-hand side, die Juden sind, der Jude ist unser Unglück. So the Jew is our, and Unglück means a number of things. It can mean misfortune, which is how it's often translated in this particular context. It can mean unhappiness, misery, or sort of disaster. So a railway accident, for example, is an Eisenbahnunglück. So die Juden sind unser Unglück, or der Jude ist unser Unglück, is quite a sort of semantically dense formulation that carries misery, disaster, and misfortune with it. We see the same formulation on the other sign that we can see there. So die Juden sind unser Unglück. Precisely the same formulation. But on the left then, the Jew is our misfortune, may he stay away from us. And then the one on the right says, we don't want to see any Jews.
So it's interesting, the thing that's bubbling away in the background here is what is the authority behind the erection of these signs? And as you made clear in the article, it wouldn't be possible to put up this obviously a very large sign on a very large bridge without some kind of official permission. But it's sort of ambiguous how much it's a local initiative and how much it's a official.
Yeah, I think it's they're unofficial but clearly tolerated. If they were official signs, they would have a swastika on them somewhere, and it's very noticeable that none of them does, apart from the display cases for Der Stürmer newspaper, and we'll talk about one of those images shortly. So they are unofficial, but clearly the fact that they are there, and that at least the one that we see to the left here has been placed on in a very prominent position that wouldn't have been accessible without some kind of mechanical aid, and indeed official permission, means that that they were tolerated but unofficial, and so they occupied a sort of strange status.
It's I think, sorry, one of the things that is that we got from looking through the album and looking through the pictures in the album and then choosing pictures to lay out in the magazine is the harrowing quality of pure repetition, that these things are appearing all over the place in public. The way that they force themselves into your presence is unlike the experience of seeing pictures in publications.
Completely, and also unlike reading the printed word, I think. And one of the things I was thinking about when looking at these photographs is what difference does it make that we are reading text in a photograph rather than reading the same texts on the printed page, where everything is reduced to the same kind of writing. There is a sort of the homogenizing effect of the print medium. And it is precisely that repetition or variation within repetition, but the fact that you're confronted time after time after time with slightly different manifestations of the same kinds of sentiment is one of the most disturbing things about them. If we could go back, Richard, one of the contributions to the chat asked for a translation. So on the left-hand side, it says the inhabitants of this village want nothing to do with Jews, and the sign on the right basically says the same thing using slightly different terminology.
And we mentioned the Stürmerkaste.
They're exactly the same, aren't they?
Yeah, we mentioned the Stürmerkaste here. So this is an example of those. Can you describe what's going on in this picture?
Yeah, so at the top of the display case, you can see the words Der Stürmer. Der Stürmer was a particularly nasty anti-Semitic newspaper edited by a Nazi party member called Julius Streicher. It was extraordinarily crude and also kind of quite sexualized in its content, while also being sadistic. Streicher was actually held in a degree of contempt by some of the Nazi bigwigs precisely because his anti-Semitic representations were so crass and so crude. He was unacceptable even to some of the Nazis themselves. But all over Germany, these so-called Stürmerkasten, so Stürmer cases, were erected and displayed basically the latest issues of this anti-Semitic publication, so that anybody who happened to be passing could go along and read the content at no cost. And one of the things that you see is that the Stürmerkasten then carried various anti-Semitic slogans, and these repeated themselves from one Stürmerkasten to the next as well. So across the top, we have the line, Die Rassenfrage ist der Schlüssel zur Weltgeschichte. So the racial question is the key to world history. That's a quotation from Treitschke, 19th century German historian, and it occurred, as far as I'm aware, on virtually every Stürmerkasten. Then we've got Die Juden sind unser Unglück on the left-hand side. That's a slogan that we've encountered already. So the Jews are our misfortune. On the right-hand side, we've got wer beim Juden kauft, ist ein Volksverräter. So whoever buys things from Jews is a traitor to the people. And along the bottom, it says, Frauen und Mädchen, die Juden sind euer Verderben. So girls and women, Jews are your ruination. And one of the things I talk about very briefly in the article is the fact that Nazi propaganda promulgated an image of Jews as, sexually rapacious, prone to uncontrollable lusts and sexual violence, and that went hand in hand with an almost hysterical anxiety for the sort of the guileless but pure German maiden.
The striking thing about this. Sorry, Jonathan. The striking thing about this picture is the everydayness of the fact that it seems to be like on the edge of a park, and it's apparently a couple out walking their baby.
Exactly, and this is the other image of an act of looking that I found really quite fascinating, because it's this is just a casual stroll. One summer's afternoon, let's pop along and read a little bit of anti-Semitic propaganda, or even if you don't go out with the intention of doing so, it's simply there as a casual presence on the street. And it's that casual everydayness of the propaganda that I think is again quite eye-opening and disturbing. As you say, it's a young couple out with their baby, as far as we can tell.
So this is the last picture we're going to look at, and again, it's the everydayness, but it connects with something that has a contemporary resonance for us with advertising. What's going on in this picture?
Absolutely. So we have an advertising column for Persil. Everybody knows that Persil washes whiter than white, and we have a white woman in a white dress wearing white shoes in the upper part of that advertising column. And below that, on the base of the column, there are a couple of daubed anti-Semitic slogans. So the one says on the left-hand side, hyenas are never decent, so therefore neither are Jews. And then on the right-hand side, Jews get out. And again, thinking of why these images disturb, I think here, the fact that an ostensibly harmless advertising image is almost made part of anti-Semitic rhetoric is really quite insidious. So clearly the word decent in German as in English is heavily sexually connoted. The idea that Jews are indecent suggests that they are in some sense sexually violent and disreputable, and therefore the pure German woman needs to keep herself away from them. And the way in which then the anti-Semitic slogan kind of is made more powerful by activating the relationship between itself and the personal advertisement above is really quite shocking. And yet again, it's an everyday sight in the middle of this particular city. And something I didn't mention in the article because it seemed out of place, but that resonates somehow, is that at the end of the war, the nickname for the denazification certificate that was given to prominent German Nazis was the Persilschein, so the Persil certificate, which implied that you had been washed whiter than white. And I couldn't quite link that to the photograph when I was writing the article, but it's certainly food for thought.
Mm. It's difficult to imagine that it would be very easy to wash away the experience of seeing this signage everywhere.
Well, quite, and I mean, I think the as far as we know, the photographs were then used by the documentation center in Amsterdam to publicize the nature of Nazi anti-Semitism beyond Germany. The collection that was put together by that organization became the foundation of the Wiener Holocaust Library, which is where the album now resides, and to which Richard gave thanks earlier on in the launch event. Quite how effective these images were in raising awareness of Nazi anti-Semitism is something that I think we will probably never know. But I think that once you've seen them, they do leave an indelible mark on you. Absolutely.
Yes.
Fritz Fürstenberg, by the way, survived the war and died in Amsterdam, in Holland, in 1971. I haven't been able to find out a great deal more about him than that, but at least it's a kind of happy end, if you like.
Yes, and something that's striking about the album is it's a kind of, in a way, it's a kind of heroic act. It's the agency that he's demonstrating in going out and taking these pictures is very much in defiance of the viciousness that he's facing.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's an artifact that bespeaks extraordinary courage. And I think the quality of the photographs, which is often slightly blurry, there's been very little attention given to composition. You know, there's a fair amount of camera wobble on display. You know, clearly these were photographs taken under duress. And I think that pressure and potentially that fear is readable from the surface of the image.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Jonathan. That's
thank you.
Fascinating. We have a little bit of time for some questions. If anybody wants to ask somebody questions, then you could put up your hand digitally or by writing a question in the chat. A couple of people have commented on these on the pictures in the chat. It's interesting. Trish has mentioned this. The idea that these type of images should be part of school curricula, and I have to say, you know, I'm familiar with anti-Semitic caricatures and obviously photographs of Nuremberg rallies and all this type of public media produced and circulated internationally, but there's something different about seeing these documentary pictures of the public realm taken by someone who's not orchestrating them. So it would be nice if these pictures did circulate more widely.
I think that's right. I mean, I think that it's just the insidious grassroots presence of anti-Semitism that is perhaps not really articulated in school curricula or even at universities. You know, it's seen as something that was primarily a matter of the party or the SS and not ordinary citizens on the ground. I think that is often lost in the way that we teach the Holocaust and the Nazi period.
Yes. So yes, if anybody has any questions, then please raise your hand digitally, or you could write a question in the chat column. I suppose hopefully this. We have a question here. Sorry, I can't see who's actually raised their hand now. But if you'd like to, Jonathan, you've raised your hand yourself.
Yeah, if nobody else has a question, I was going to ask Judith about about digital photography and the fact that the wide circulation of these images is in part facilitated by the fact that they are digital. If you had a print, you could simply rip it up, throw the negatives in the fire, and it's gone.
Did you unmute yourself?
Sorry, I didn't unmute in time. Yeah. I mean, in a way, that's you've made the observation. I completely agree. Everything is different now. You know, images and memes and things zip around all over the place. I mean, I think, to be honest, it's quite a long time since it was as simple as a kind of like an old-fashioned blackmail film or something. You know, tear up the negatives and the only prints. I mean, I think that for a long time, certainly with public images, there's been, even before sort of internet and Twitter, things were reproduced pretty widely, so that once something kind of got out, it wasn't so easy to change it. I think with even with print media, I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, once an image is in a newspaper, even before you have the internet, it is out there. And you may not have the negative, you can destroy the negative, but it's, you know, there's so many hundreds of thousands or millions of copies all over the place. So, but I completely agree. I think what you put your finger on is partly also just the speed of how quickly things disseminate. And I mean, although obviously it opens up a whole different kind of worms to talk about it, you know, the algorithms and the ways, you know, that it's not just kind of random, the way that things quickly get around and reproduce. So, you know, I think your point is absolutely crucial. The images now can just get instantaneously all around the world and in quite insidious ways. I mean, it's you know, it's changed everything.
Do you think, Judith, that having written about the effect that these pictures had, do you think that the ease with which pictures flow around now is adds to a greater openness? Is it a positive thing that that we will invariably see the indiscreet pictures from Partygate, or do you think a more controlled environment is important as well?
Well, I don't know that those are necessarily, I don't think those are necessarily the actual opposites, like controlled or, I mean, to some extent, images are always controlled. I mean, just think about what we've been saying. There's all these pictures that exist that nobody's seen apart from a handful of people and presumably the police. I mean, that's pretty extraordinary. I find it amazing that these pictures haven't got out. So there is still a huge amount of control everywhere, even including on, you know, on the internet about in some contexts, and in others there isn't. I think there are so many things conflated there. It's also a question of whether transparency can be equated with pictures. Pictures are not necessarily transparent. Often pictures are not only opaque, but often pictures function as a kind of mask or a kind of a concealment of something which is more important, of the thing which isn't in the picture. I mean, it's absolutely sort of basic point, but once you have a picture of something, then you forget to look at all the things, or think about, or even investigate all the things that aren't in the picture. So I think that I've never thought that pictures and transparency kind of go together, if you know what I mean. So I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's a very kind of complicated issue.
Thank you very much for attending. I hope you enjoyed it. If you missed some of it or would like to watch it again, then we'll be posting a digital version of this on our YouTube channel. I hope you enjoyed the magazine. Thank you again to Judith and Jonathan, and we'll see you the next time.